sorry, I can't hear you.
Welcome to today's History of the Upper Ohio Valley, brought to you as a public service by ESV Teleproductions. We will address issues and concerns of residents in this area. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest. I'm your host, Bob Connors.
Well, good evening, friends and neighbors. We have a great program for you today. We have a special guest today. Andy Thompson is Ohio State Representative for this area, and we're going to have a nice talk with Andy. Welcome, Andy.
Good to be with you, Bob.
We've had some inquiries here in the area from residents about the schools and the hours versus the days when the kids go to school. Can you explain why they changed to hours?
Well, in part, we have what are called calamity days. And so when a weather-related event or something else causes schools to be canceled, that takes a chunk of time away from what would normally have been learned, be a learning day. And so as a result, we moved it to hours because we felt like it was easier. Sometimes the days created a problem with making them up. And so we went to a system several years ago where they could state it in hours, and they would have to get a certain number of minimum hours in the school year to qualify. And that gave them more flexibility about how they would make that time up.
So they could have a snow day, 2-hour delay or 1-hour
Right.
delay and just...
And they've gone to that a lot more often. You see a lot more 2-hour delays, which don't really take as much time off. They don't have to do an entire day, but they might have a day where it was, 10 degrees, and they were trying to give people more time for them to get into school.
Oh, well, that's good. I think that'll help.
Yeah, it was a common sense approach. It was one of the first bills.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Common Core regulations have a lot of parents concerned. Most people don't really understand it, and yours truly included. And so we thought maybe people should understand a little bit about where it came from. So we have a little video on the history of Common Core that was produced by the Freedom Works Foundation, and we would like to run that to give the folks an understanding of what is going on, how we got Common Core started. So can we run that?
Back in 2007, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Eli Broad Foundation pledged $60 million to the development of uniform American standards. They targeted a pair of Washington, D.C. based organizations, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, to develop and implement a political strategy creating these national standards. The NGA and the CCSSO have no official relationship with states or schools, so they partnered with Achieve Inc., another DC-based organization that began seeking common state standards back in 1998. Together, they wrote Benchmarking for Success. Benchmarking for Success is a common standards visioning document in which students are labeled human capital, and the ideal education system would mimic successful global competitors, such as China. This document repeatedly emphasizes human capital, collective influence, international benchmarks, aligned materials, monitoring, intervention, and global measurement of performance. Achieve then took the document and their political strategy to Secretary of Education Arne Duncan in 2009. Congress, meanwhile, earmarked $4.35 billion, that's billion with a B, to improve state standards and ensure academic success through the 2009 stimulus package, otherwise known as the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The same week that ARA was announced, Common Core was introduced to the states via Race to the Top grants, a competitive system of federal funding awarded to states who meet specific requirements. The connection to special interest groups continued to strengthen as top executives from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in another backdoor deal, were selected to take positions in the Department of Education, one as Secretary Arne Duncan's Chief of Staff, and the other as the Chief Officer of the Office of Innovation and Improvement. On June 1, 2009, the standards were officially introduced, mimicking the Benchmarking for Success document with a few notable changes. Objectives were added addressing comprehensive data systems aimed at measuring students, internationally benchmarked assessments, and other invasive programs. In March of 2010, the federal government increased the pressure on cash-strapped states to implement Common Core standards and the surrounding requirements by stating that states may not receive other federal formula funds if they have not fully implemented Common Core by 2015. At this time, the actual standards were not fully written, developed, or approved, Yet states were handcuffed to implementing the program, and unsuspecting school districts, parents, teachers, and students were in the dark about what was ahead. Experts reviewing the proposed curriculum refused to sign off on the standards. Yet, they were still passed along to the states and our children. In 2011, Achieve began working on the national Next Generation Science Standards and will soon begin developing social studies standards. Common Core's tentacles continue to expand even today. In May of 2013, President Obama introduced his Preschool for All initiative, providing Race to the Top grants to states who are then required to accept expanded data collection, common standards, and a partnership with Health and Human Services. Back in 2007, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Eli
Okay, that's a quick little video that shows a lot about how we got into this mess. And as I want to sort of start with as concisely as you can put it, what is Common Core and how did Ohio get into this mess?
Well, Common Core is basically, it's a system of education. They base it off of this set of standards that they came up with, and they started out with English and math, then they have associated testing with it as well. The testing is coded to the standards, and so kids are going to be measured on how well the teachers are implementing the standards, how well they're absorbing those standards, and in that process they're garnering lots of data on these students. So your typical school, they saw to it that they would all get Google Chrome notebooks that they'd be working on so that every keystroke would be captured in a database. And so it all seemed, gosh, that's generous of them to give us those free laptops. But it turns out that they had another plan. And so many schools, concurrent with that, Ohio received $400 million. So there was really a nice financial incentive for Ohio to go into these Common Core standards. More than 40 states, I think it was something like 44, 45 states, adopted them all or in part. Some did, a few states didn't do the math or didn't do the English, but mostly it was about 44, 45 states that got involved with this. And I think there were 4 states that opted out. So.
Well, that's
of course,
interesting.
we've got 57 states, so that's...
Yeah, there are 57 states. I learned that about Common Core. When this started, it was Ted Strickland's fault, along with appointees and President Obama. Why did Governor Kasich jump on board of this train wreck?
Well, what you need to know is the National Governors Association was very involved with this. You had the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. And so what they wanted to do, Achieve Inc., which you heard about earlier, they were trying to implement this, but they wanted the imprimatur of some organizations to make it look like it wasn't federal. So they found these organizations that sounded like they were state-based.
Sound like they're national.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, they were national, but they wanted them to sound like it was governors and state school officials. So it didn't sound, all the law and the federal government has no role constitutionally in education, but they kind of get themselves in there by offering money, and that was really what induced Ohio to do this. Governor Strickland, his actual director of his Department of Education, went on to Washington, D.C., and went to work for the Obama administration. So there was a strong link between Ohio and the Obama administration, and the Obama administration, of course, realized how strategically important Ohio was for elections and other things, so they wanted to have a hand here in what was going on. And the Gates Foundation has been in Ohio since 2000, working to try to adjust our education system to their needs and their goals. So we've been dealing with their reforms for a while now. Common Core was the perfect way to program this over across the entire nation, and that's what they were able to do with the stimulus money and these new standards.
So it really sounds to me like it's all about the money.
Very much. I mean, this is if you think about every time new textbooks come out, there's lots of money to be made. The testing itself makes a lot of money because that's supplied by the testing companies. So when these standards were written, it was mostly people from the testing industry who were the ones who were sitting at the table writing those standards. Again, coded to the standards themselves, coded with the testing, so they were perfect ability to mine data. As you saw in the piece earlier, they set up these statewide databases, and that was just going to provide the information that these corporate partners wanted. So it was corporate education and it was federal education. Federal education, which we shouldn't have, and the corporate thing, which is really an intrusion into, what education should be about, which is the children. So it's a money grab, it's a data grab, it's an intrusion, it's a constitutional problem. There's so many things wrong with this whole initiative, and we've just been battling it for 6-7 years now.
Yeah, I know you worked hard on that.
Absolutely. 2013, I was sitting, when I was elected, I went onto the Education Committee, and the words Common Core weren't ever mentioned. But it was being implemented as we were sitting there in a committee, and they were doing bits and pieces. They were adding more things into the administrative code and the revised code to fully implement Common Core, and we were really not aware of it. Once I became aware of it, then I set out with other activists to try to do something.
Well, that was good. Where do you see the effects of Common Core in education and the classroom?
Well, you see a mathematics program, another version of New Math. Remember New Math from the 70s, and it was a disaster. This is a math that they said was tried actually in the Soviet Union and failed. So whatever fails over in the Soviet Union, we bring here, including a lot of their election stuff. That's another day, another program. But really, it was a terrible math system, which they insisted was new order, more complex. It's going to help kids in the STEM fields and everything. So they sold us a bill of goods. What I have heard from my constituents, and maybe you've heard from some of your viewers, is that it's math that parents can't help their children with. So really what it does is it makes kids think their parents are stupid, and therefore the folks with Common Core can come in and really get control of young minds in a way that I think is very unhealthy.
I think I agree with that. When you first learned about this problem, what kind of steps did you take when you get hit with this and say, oh my, what are they doing here?
Yeah. Well, the first thing was to try to educate myself. I actually had a school teacher from Noble County, that's around Caldwell, who contacted me and said, Andy, what do you know about this? Well, I went to the leaders, my caucus, the people in the Republican Party in the State House, and went to the people that I knew in the Education Committee, and I said, what is this? And they said, Andy, don't worry about it. It's all good stuff. So, in that point, we were getting information from various people who were up in arms about this. And at that time, Glenn Beck and David Barton said, we're going to have a kind of a nationwide get-together down in Texas. We're going to educate you about what's going on with Common Core. We're going to see, how best to message this as we try to combat Common Core. And so we had activists from around the country. We had folks from New York, Utah, Illinois, Tennessee, Texas, etc. Now, Texas had battled this issue of textbooks and standards before, so David Barton was part of that process, and he was able to give us some very helpful information. So, and then I came up with my first bill, which was House Bill 237. Didn't get very far, although a lot of the state representatives were hearing from their constituents too. So we had a lot of interest in it, but we didn't have support at the top. Subsequent to that bill died in the first session. We came back with House Bill 597. That went straight to the Rules Committee because, again, the fever was really there. People were very, very upset about it. It was affecting primary elections.
Yeah.
That was really what made them respond. And we passed it through the Rules Committee. And then the goal was to try to get it on the House floor. And they said, well, if you can get 50 votes, Andy, we'll put it on the floor. So I think it was designed that we would never quite get those votes, but we would look like we gave it the old college try.
Yeah.
And, that happens in Washington, happens in Columbus. Fundamentally, what Common Core does in Ohio is it makes lots of money for certain groups. One which you may not know about is Battelle, which is a think tank up in Columbus. You might have heard about it before. They've made more than $25 million from the Gates Foundation and others to implement Common Core. So the Ohio Chamber has made some nice money on Common Core. Money has been given out by the Gates Foundation to all kinds of entities to get them on board, to help them learn to love it, the Business Roundtable in Ohio. So when I came out with my first bill, the Business Roundtable immediately said, kill that bill. And I thought to myself, you haven't even seen the bill yet. but you're already opposed to it. And I realized at that point that the fix was in. Columbus loved Common Core. It was a great money maker. Lobbyists loved it. And then these groups like Battelle and the Business Roundtable and the Ohio Chamber liked it. So, it was going to be hard for me to overcome that special interest love for Common Core.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. But,
Yeah.
Are there hopeful signs in Ohio or elsewhere for Common Core that you can think of? And is Trump doing any better job than Obama with Betsy DeVos heading the?
I would say
Department
that
of
I think Trump is probably, and Betsy DeVos are probably not making matters worse, but I'm not sure that Betsy DeVos is doing anything to make matters better. One of the things that was passed, we've had a series of almost like Soviet-style 5-year programs in education. We had Schools to Work, Goals 2000, No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top. Much like the Soviet Union, the 5-year plan fails, they come up with a new name and everything. Well, similarly in Common Core, they reauthorized No Child Left Behind recently with the Every Student Succeeds Act. Doesn't that sound great? Don't we want every student to succeed?
Yeah, well, yes.
Well, all they did was reauthorize more time and effort for Common Core. What they do in D.C. is they come up with something that sounds great, and they tell us, well, it's going to restore local control. You're going to have all of the discretion that you need. But really what it says is we still have to send a plan to Washington, get it approved, and if they bless it, then we can do, what we want to do. But they're not going to bless it because they want to control the process. So is it hopeful? I think the only hopeful thing we can say is it's probably going to collapse pretty soon, much like Obamacare, and then we'll have to do something else. I think they're already working on the next 5-year plan, probably.
I suspect they are.
Yeah.
It's been recently reported that the Trump administration ended several Common Core regulations, and including the Race to the Top.
Yeah.
No Child Left Behind.
Again, Race to the Top, the money ran out for that after about 3-4 years. So there's no money attached to it right now, but the authority is still there and the perceived threat. One of the things, whenever I bring legislation forward, they say, well, they'll take away our Title I money. They'll hurt us financially if you try to repeal these standards. That's a boogeyman that doesn't really exist, because you and I can probably figure out that no administration is going to take money away from Ohio. It's too important politically. It's too important as an economic engine. So they're not going to attempt to punish Ohio, and frankly, they've never punished any state for not going along with the standards or for battling the standards. So I think it's one of those things where Ohio needs to take action. I think this is, it's proven to be a failure. The testing is confusing. The graduation, we've had a graduation crisis where people can't understand the pathways for graduation. So, the charade is about over. I'm sorry that my service in Columbus is coming to an end, but hopefully somebody can pick up this baton, and in the time, I've got about 10 months left, hopefully we'll be able to get something substantive done. I have a House Bill 176, which I can tell you more about, but we do have a good bill that restores local control, that really deals with the standards, and hopefully we will get a chance to see that pass.
Is there any evidence that Common Core has improved education by any testing, anything at all?
No, I'd say the best evidence that we have, Massachusetts is a good example. Massachusetts had the standards which were #1 in the nation. They actually switched to Common Core. And people say, well, Common Core must be great because they switched over. Well, they got $250 million, and the governor of Massachusetts was a guy named Deval Patrick, whose name might ring a bell. He's one of Obama's best friends. So they were going to jump in. Their test scores have gone down since they went into Common Core. I think generally we have seen nationwide that scores have plummeted. Now, the response from the Common Core people is it's because those standards are just so rigorous. They're so tough. There's no evidence that kids are better educated. On the tests that, the ACT and SAT, we don't see scores going up. And at the same time that they came up with these standards, David Coleman, the architect of the standards, went to the college boards and started redesigning the SAT and the ACT so we wouldn't know the difference. So they cover their tracks very well. They're very disingenuous. They're also very engaged in every aspect of education. It's kind of like, when they went into the woods to Grandma's house and they left a trail of breadcrumbs. They're picking up the breadcrumbs so we can't figure out where we've been, and there's no way to measure apples to apples whether we have made progress. But test scores are not improving, I can tell you that much.
How do you think this affects the future of education?
It's one more pothole in the road. I mean, we have, going through some of the tragedies that we've had with school shootings and things, our culture has changed a lot, and not for the better. And in part that's been because of a public education system which has eliminated God and all the standard values. Education was originally designed to instill virtue in kids, teach them right from wrong in a good way. Now we mostly just teach what's wrong, and we confuse people, and we're fighting over things like transgender bathrooms instead of teaching kids to read and write.
Yeah,
So
that just stuns me when you think about it. Something as simple as thou shalt not kill,
right.
That's gone from the schools, from the public square. And are we not seeing the results?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen since, the war on poverty began, we've seen the dissolution of American families when, fathers were replaced by government paychecks, and so we really didn't need to have a dad anymore as long as we had a government check coming in. And we have that breakup of the family has had devastating consequences. Now when a kid goes to school or a teacher encounters a kid at school, that person has to be like the mother, the teacher, the social worker. All this stuff falls on the schools, and at the same time the left realized they wanted to capture the schools so that they could implement their agenda. So we've got just this calamity in education. It would be nice if it were really about the kids and how much they're learning. What Common Core fundamentally does is it takes time away from the teachers that could be devoted to meeting the needs of kids and dedicates it to testing so that we can make more money for the testing companies, and the textbook companies can get rich as well. So it's very unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. Unfortunately for that. Speaking of unfortunate, we have to move on. But I did want to ask you one more question. It's pretty important. You've done a good job in the House of Representatives. You really have. I've watched you throughout that whole time and worked with you, as you know.
I appreciate that.
And you did a really good job. So I'm wanting to know what's going on with you otherwise. What's next for Andy Thompson?
Well, if you know the answer, you can tell me and I'll know for sure. I'll tell you, Bob, I'm just really at this point praying about it, and I hope that something will be revealed to me. I'm getting my name out there. I'm talking with folks in the public policy community, Trump administration. I've had some interest from them as well. So I will see where my future leads me, but I'm looking for something else that I can continue to do to make a difference in public policy. And there are great groups out there like Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Works, and think tanks like the Buckeye Institute, and I've sat down with them as well. So I've got a lot of people looking out for me and hopeful that I will land someplace so that I can continue to help. But I've certainly spent a lot of time in Ohio, and that's where I feel like I could be the most useful.
I'm sure you will be.
Yeah.
Andy, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bob.
It's been wonderful
Appreciate
again.
it.
Come back again,
I'll
and
be glad to.
we'll be back.
Okay.
Video and media technology have changed dramatically over the years. At ESV Teleproductions, we have the knowledge and the latest equipment to complete your project that will be a cut above the rest. The next time you need media produced, call the award-winning professionals in St. Clairsville, Enchanted Sound and Video, ESV Teleproductions, 740-695-5289.
Unless he wants to go. He's got a long
I
ride.
probably need to head on back and
Okay.
meet
Thanks,
up with
Andy.
my family.
Well, I thank you very much.
I hope it was useful.
I
I think Freedom Works probably did a good
I'm
job.
gonna tell you what,
Filling in the
me and
blanks.
this Common Core stuff, we don't like each other
Oh,
at all.
thank you again, Bob.
Thanks, Andy.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, watch your head. All right, Bob, hold on.
It's gonna be a short
that's
one.
I said. That's okay. Just it's our first anniversary show today.
Okay, I'll wing it on that too, huh?
Thank you.
Well, we're back. I think it was a very interesting conversation. with Representative Thompson. We're going to take just a minute here for some of the things that are going on in our country right now in the world. Is pretty disgusting, with children being shot in schools, and it seems that we can't get past the politics behind it and work on just solving the problem of making our schools safe. And I think maybe we all need to take a look back at what's going on and just understand that our problem is we need school security. Right now we don't need gun regulation. We need school security. And it's kind of silly to think if you regulate some gun away that that's going to make schools more secure. It's absurd. So I'm hoping that we will change to making schools better and safer, and this nonsense of blaming the NRA. There are some things about the NRA that I don't think most people even understand. The NRA, number one, is an association of riflemen, people who are gun collectors, target shooters, all people who are good at what they do, and they spend time teaching people safety with guns. And that is what they do. They also defend the Second Amendment, which is important to everybody, because if we don't have a Second Amendment right, the rest of our rights will fall away too, because the Second Amendment protects the other rights. That these are things I found out about the NRA. The NRA does not sell guns. The NRA does not sell bullets. The NRA does not train people to go out and shoot people. The NRA is not an organization that puts a lot of money even into politics. They just defend the Second Amendment and teach people gun safety. And this is something that most of us really don't know because our media keeps it away from us. But the NRA has supported and pushed for tighter regulation on who buys guns. And they've done it many times. And the problem turns out to be is we're not enforcing the laws that are on the books now. And so the answer to these people who want to go after the NRA and the Second Amendment is, well, let's pass some more laws that we're not going to enforce. Wouldn't it be better if we followed the NRA's advice and put more people on the no-gun list, like people who have mental issues? If you've checked into a mental hospital, you don't really need a gun. That just happens to be a fact. And they don't have a right to a gun. They have a right, we have a right to be safe. And there are things we can do, and much of the problem we have now is the law enforcement and the government's not doing their job. The perfect example of this is in Florida, with an insane ex-student shooting all of those kids. The police department in that county went to his house 30 times for violent action. 30 times. And he didn't end up on a no-gun rule. He was able to buy a gun. He has a history of violence. He had a history of violence in the school, and the school did everything in their power. They expelled him to keep him away. So if the school knows about it and can't do anything, the police went to his house 30 times, and they didn't put his name on any kind of a restriction on guns rule. Excuse me. And the FBI, were notified 2 times about this particular guy, and they did nothing with it. The only person they interviewed was somebody who said, I saw something and I'm saying something. I'm thinking that that's ridiculous. So I hope that we can all sit back and understand what this issue is. We need to talk about securing our schools, not about regulating guns, not about taking guns away from people, but let's talk about securing our schools and enforcing the laws that are on the books. That guy should have never had a gun, and we had all the signs in the world. That should be where we start with our discussion on how to solve this problem. So let's all encourage our legislators to make the school secure as the goal. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again next time.